Minecraft horror story, The Death by Hallucinations. Steve watched Nia step onto a bridge that was not there. One moment she stood beside him at the edge of the ravine. The next, she walked into open air with both hands raised as if placing blocks beneath her feet. Her boots found nothing. She dropped past the abandoned mineshaft, struck a ledge, and vanished into the dark below. "Nia," Tessa shouted. Hugo emptied a water bucket over the edge. The stream reached the bottom several seconds too late. A message appeared in chat. Nia hit the ground too hard. Steve stared at the empty space where she had stepped. Why did she do that? Tessa did not answer. Her hands shook on her diamond pickaxe. Hugo leaned over the edge, then pulled back. "She said you were building a bridge," he whispered. Steve turned toward him. "I did not place anything. I know I saw air, but she kept telling you to slow down." They climbed to the bottom and gathered Nia's items before they vanished. Her helmet lay beside a patch of redstone ore. Her sword had landed in a cobweb. Most of her food and blocks were scattered across the stone. Her map was open on the ground. A bridge had been drawn across it. The line began at the ledge and continued over the ravine in a perfect row of grey squares. On the far side stood a small black figure wearing a hat. Tessa picked up the map. The drawing disappeared. "Did either of you see that?" Steve asked. "See what?" Hugo said. Steve looked at the ledge high above them. A tall man stood where Nia had fallen. He wore a long black coat and a wide hat. His body was darker than the cave behind him. Two white eyes watched Steve. Below them, a wide white grin showed every tooth. The man held a knife in one hand. He used the other to place an invisible block over the ravine. Then he stepped onto it. The figure walked across the air, one slow step at a time. Steve raised his bow, but Tessa grabbed his arm. "What are you aiming at?" "The man above us." Hugo looked up. There is no one there. The black figure stopped directly over Steve. He tipped his hat, opened his mouth, and laughed. The sound came from inside Steve's helmet. The memorial. They buried Nia's armor beneath a cherry tree near their base. Her sword went into an item frame on the trunk. Tessa placed a sign that read Nia, Day 91. Hugo covered the ground with yellow flowers because Nia had used them to mark every path she explored. None of them called the fall an accident. Nia knew how to cross a ravine. She carried 2 stacks of stone, but both were still in her inventory when she died. She had not lagged. She had reacted to something only she could see. Their base stood on a rocky coast. 3 houses surrounded a central storehouse, and a lighthouse marked the harbor. The world had always felt open and bright. After Nia's death, dark spaces appeared everywhere. The gaps beneath roofs seemed deeper. The unlit rooms inside the lighthouse looked crowded. Each reflection in the sea moved a little later than it should. Steve saw the man again during the memorial. He stood behind the cherry tree, half hidden by pink leaves. In daylight, his coat had no texture. It looked like a hole cut into the world. His eyes followed Steve while Tessa placed the final flower. "Do not turn around," Steve said quietly. Hugo froze. Why? "He is behind the tree." Tessa kept her eyes on the ground. "The same one from the cave?" "Yes." "What is he doing?" The man lifted the knife, and pointed at Nia's sign. The letters changed. Nia saw paradise first. "He is looking at the grave," Steve said. The man turned the knife towards Steve. "Now he is looking at me." Hugo ran at the tree with his axe raised. Steve shouted for him to stop. Hugo passed through the place where the man stood and struck the trunk. The figure did not move. For a second, Hugo's body and the black coat occupied the same blocks. Then the man stepped out through Hugo's back. Hugo never saw him. The figure leaned close to Steve. Black hands filled Steve's view from both sides, covering his eyes. A grey image flashed across the screen. Nia stood at the far end of the missing bridge. Her head hung at a wrong angle. She raised one finger to her lips. The image vanished. Steve fell to his knees beside the flowers. At the corner of his view was a small dandelion symbol. One petal had turned black. "We are going inside," Tessa said. "Now?" The first false world. They locked the doors and wrote down exactly what each of them could see. Steve saw the dandelion near his health bar. Hugo saw one above his hunger bar. Tessa saw no flower at all. Steve had seen the tall man twice. Hugo had only heard a laugh in the cave. Tessa had seen neither. The differences mattered. Whatever had killed Nia did not show the same lie to everyone. Tessa built a test table in the storehouse. She placed 5 blocks in a row: stone, dirt, oak planks, glass, and gold. Then she made Steve and Hugo turn away while she changed the order. Both named the blocks correctly when they looked again. Next, she placed a water bucket and a lava bucket in 2 unmarked chests. Steve chose the right one. Hugo opened the other chest and screamed. "That is Nia's head," he said. Steve saw only a lava bucket. Hugo backed into the wall. The dandelion above his hunger bar lost 2 petals. He shut his eyes and opened them again. The head was gone. "It wants us to doubt simple things," Tessa said. "Blocks, items, paths. If we cannot trust those, we cannot move." Steve looked through the storehouse window. Rain had begun over the coast. At the end of the harbor, the man stood on the water. The drops passed through his hat and coat. His white grin flashed each time lightning lit the sky. "He is outside," Steve said. "Do not describe him," Hugo replied. The man walked toward the base without sinking. He stopped beside a boat tied to the dock and tapped his knife against it. The boat changed into a black chest. Steve knew the chest was not real. He also knew there had been no chest outside that morning. "I need to test something." He took a snowball from a barrel and threw it through the window. The snowball crossed the place where the chest appeared to stand. It struck the real boat, making it rock. The image of the chest broke apart. The man stopped smiling. "Thrown items still touch the real world," Steve said. Tessa filled 3 shulker boxes with eggs, snowballs, arrows, and cheap blocks. "Then we test every path before we step. No one moves alone." Hugo stared at the rain. Nia did not get time to test. Outside, the man raised his knife and drew a line through the air. Every window went black. The rules. For 2 days, the system kept them alive. They threw an item through each doorway before entering. They struck every floor with a tool and listened for the proper sound. They read coordinates aloud so no one could be led away without the others noticing. At night, One person watched while two slept. The hallucinations came anyway. Steve opened a food chest and saw rotten flesh where the bread should have been. Hugo heard hissing from rooms with no creepers. Tessa watched the sea rise over the wall, though Steve and Hugo saw calm water below the cliff. None of the visions lasted more than a minute. Each one took another petal from the dandelion of the person who saw it. Tessa's flower appeared on the third night. She woke Steve before dawn and pointed to the lighthouse. Nia is standing on top. Steve looked. The roof was empty. What is she doing? Waving. Do not wave back. Tessa lowered her hand. She had already begun to raise it without noticing. From the lighthouse came Nia's voice. I found the bridge. Hugo woke at once. He moved toward the door. Steve blocked him. That is not her. What if she respawned? Her name is not in the player list. Maybe the list is wrong. That was the danger. Once they accepted that sight could lie, every other part of the game became doubtful. A false sound could seem real. A missing name could be another vision. Even a clear memory could have been changed. Steve made them open their inventories. Nia's sword remained in the item frame outside. Her map was in the evidence chest. The facts had not changed. We stay here until daylight, he said. The voice moved from the lighthouse to the front door. Hugo, it called. Please let me in. Hugo covered his ears. 3 knocks sounded against the wood. Tessa, I am cold. Tessa held her axe tighter. The voice became Steve's. Open the door. I am outside. The real Steve stood between them. The 3 players remained silent until sunrise. When the square sun cleared the sea, they opened the door. A knife was buried in the outer wood. It was not a vision. All 3 could touch it. The blade was white, but the handle was made from a black material that gave no item name. When Tessa placed it in a chest, the chest filled with yellow flowers. When she removed it, the flowers vanished. Hugo's dandelion lost another petal. Steve wrapped the knife in wool and sealed it inside an obsidian box. A message appeared above the box. Bad decision, Steve. The Pillager Tower. The nearest place they had not searched was an outpost beyond the dark forest. Nia had marked it on the map one day before her death. A note beside the symbol read, "Found medicine here." None of them remembered her mentioning medicine. Steve suspected another trap, but the flowers on their screens were fading. They needed information before the last petals went dark. They traveled in daylight with 3 wolves and a pack mule. Tessa led with the map. Hugo followed in the middle. Steve watched the rear. Every 30 blocks, they stopped and confirmed the sun, the compass, and their coordinates. The dark forest began near noon. Thick leaves blocked much of the sky. The man appeared between the first 2 trees. This time, all 3 players saw him. Black coat, Hugo whispered. Wide hat, Tessa said. White eyes and smile, Steve finished. The man stood still with empty hands. The knife remained sealed at the base, yet a new blade slowly grew from his palm. He pointed it toward the outpost. They went the other way. The compass turned in Steve's hand. The red needle pointed back toward the man, no matter which direction Steve faced. Tessa's map showed the outpost moving from place to place. Hugo's coordinates counted down while he walked north. "Stop trusting the displays," Tessa said. "Use the sun." They climbed the trees and kept the afternoon light on their right. It should have guided them north. After an hour, they reached the same black oak where they had started. The man still waited beneath it. He waved. The wolves growled at the tree. For the first time, a mob sensed him. Steve threw an egg. It passed through the man's chest and broke against wood. The image was not solid, but the wolves continued growling. "He is changing more than our sight," Steve said. Tessa gave each player a lead and tied them to the same fence post on the mule. They moved as one group, following the direction in which moss grew on exposed stone. By sunset, they found the outpost. It was empty. No pillagers guarded the stairs. No banners hung from the roof. The cages outside held black human shapes that vanished when Steve looked directly at them. At the top of the tower stood a brewing table. 3 bottles sat on it, each filled with white pills. A written book lay beside them. The first page showed a dandelion with 8 petals. The second held a warning. "One pill ends the visions." The next line had been added in darker ink. "For a while." The third page read, "Never take 3 before the flower blooms again." Hugo opened one bottle. "If these stop the visions, we need them." Steve looked across the forest. The man stood on the roof of a distant tree. His smile was gone. He slowly shook his head. Steve did not know whether the warning in the book was true, whether the man's reaction was true, or whether the entire tower existed. Tessa solved the question by dropping a pill onto the floor. It made a small item sound when it landed. Their wolves sniffed it. The object was real. Reality, Steve was learning, did not mean safety. The medicine. They spent the night on the outpost roof. The wolves guarded the stairs, while the 3 players studied the bottles. Each bottle contained 6 pills. No crafting recipe appeared when Steve held one. The item description showed only a yellow flower and a number. Steve's read 5, Hugo's read 3, Tessa's read 6. "Petals," Tessa said. "It is counting how many we have left." Hugo's flower had lost more petals than theirs. He heard Nia calling from the cages below and kept turning toward the sound. "I cannot listen to this all night," he said. He placed one pill in his mouth before Steve could stop him. Hugo's dandelion became whole. His shoulders relaxed. "She is gone," he said. The voice stopped. They waited for a change. Nothing approached the tower. The black figures disappeared from the cages. Even the man's shape on the distant roof faded before dawn. Tessa took one pill next. Steve refused until a grey image covered his screen. He saw Nia falling again, but this time she did not reach the bottom. She hung in the darkness, staring up at him while black hands held her in the air. Behind her, the smiling man raised his knife. Steve swallowed a pill. The image vanished. His flower opened bright and full. For the first time since the ravine, he could think without checking every corner. The silence felt clean. It was easy to understand how a player could begin needing the medicine. That was why the warning frightened him. They took the bottles, the book, and the brewing table. Before leaving, Steve searched the lower rooms. Beneath a carpet, he found a trapdoor leading to a cell. One wall was covered with scratched messages. The first lines were careful records. Day 4. The pill removed him for one night. Day 8. 2 pills removed him for 3 hours. Day 9. He stood closer after each dose. The writing became rough near the floor. Day 10. He is not in the shadows. The shadows are in me. The final message was written beneath the bed. If the lock starts after the pill run, he has become real. Steve copied the words into a book. When he turned, the man from the shadow stood inside the cell. The creature no longer smiled. He reached for Steve, but his hand stopped an inch from the armor. The pill had placed a clear wall between them. The man tapped the invisible surface with his knife. Once, twice, 3 times. A crack appeared in the air. Steve climbed out and closed the trapdoor. The return home. For one full day, the pills seemed to solve everything. The group returned through the forest without losing direction. Their maps stayed clear. The compass pointed toward spawn. They saw no false paths or changed blocks. By evening, the lighthouse appeared over the trees. The relief ended at the gate. Nia stood in the center of the base. All 3 players saw her. She wore no armor, but her skin and name looked correct. She held the map from the ravine. "You took long enough," she said. Hugo dropped his sword. "Nia?" Steve checked the player list. Her name was absent. "Throw something at her," Tessa said. Nia looked hurt. "You buried me, and that is what you say." Hugo took one step forward. Steve threw an egg. Nia caught it. That should have proved she was real instead. Her fingers closed around the egg and crushed it into black smoke. The wolves began barking. Nia smiled. Her teeth grew too many. Her body stretched upward. Pink clothes turned into a black coat, and her hair widened into the edge of a hat. The man from the shadow stood where she had been. He was visible to all 3 now. The creature lifted a hand. Dark copies of Steve, Tessa, Hugo, and Nia appeared around the yard. They ran in different directions. Some screamed, some laughed. One false Steve struck a wolf with a sword. The real wolves attacked every image and found nothing. Steve heard the laugh behind him. He remembered the message in the cell. If the laugh starts after the pill, run. "Lighthouse," he shouted. They ran for the stone tower. The man followed, no longer walking. His legs bent at sharp angles as he crossed the yard. He swung the knife at Hugo and cut a line through the back of his armor. Black particles poured from the mark. Tessa reached the lighthouse first. She closed the iron door and rang the warning bell. Steve and Hugo entered just before the man struck the outside wall. The knife came through the stone. It moved along the inside as if cutting cloth. A wide opening appeared. The man leaned through it, white eyes bright in the dark tower. Hugo took a second pill. The creature vanished. The cut in Hugo's armor remained. "That is 2, Steve said. "I know how to count." "The second one made him touch you." "The second one saved me." They spent the rest of the night at the top of the lighthouse. Hugo would not give up his bottle. Tessa quietly moved the other bottles into her ender chest. Below them, someone wearing Nia's skin walked around the base until morning. The way to the end. The map recovered from the ravine changed after sunrise. A green line now ran from the base toward a point thousands of blocks inland. At its end was a drawing of an end portal. Tessa believed the portal might be another lure. Steve believed it might be both a lure and a way out. The man from the shadow used sleep, memory, and fear. The end had no normal day, no beds, and no familiar places for him to copy. If they defeated the dragon and returned through the exit portal, the game might clear the effect. That is a guess, Hugo said. So is staying here, Steve replied. They already had ender pearls, but they needed blaze powder. The trip to the Nether Fortress could not be avoided. Steve repaired the stone bridge and added rails on both sides. Every 5 blocks, Tessa placed a different colored block, so a false path would be easy to spot. Hugo said almost nothing. His flower looked full, yet dark roots curled around its stem. They entered the Nether on day 97. The fortress stood across the lava lake. No hallucinations appeared during the first hour. They fought blazes, gathered rods, and reached the bridge with enough powder for 16 eyes. Then Hugo stopped beside the rail. Nia is in the lava, he said. Steve looked down. He saw only the bright lake. She says there is water under it, Hugo continued. The lava is the fake part. Tessa moved between him and the edge. Listen to the sound. Lava popped below them. Hugo shook his head. I hear water. Throw a block, Steve said. Hugo dropped a piece of stone. It struck the lava and burned. The block is fake too. His dandelion lost every petal at once. Hugo pulled out his bottle. Do not take another, Steve said. I need to see what is real. That is what the pills take away. Hugo swallowed the 3rd pill. The Nether went silent. The man from the shadow rose from the lava behind him. His body pushed the bright liquid aside. The coat had weight now. The knife in his hand dripped black smoke. Hugo looked at the creature and smiled with relief. See, he said, it is only Nia. The man opened his arms. Hugo stepped off the bridge. Steve caught his wrist. For a second, Hugo hung above the lava, kicking at something only he could see. Let go, Hugo begged. She built a platform. The man leaned over Steve's shoulder and placed the knife against his fingers. Tessa swung her axe. It struck the creature's arm and made a real sound. The 3rd pill had given him a body through Hugo's mind. The man turned on her. His knife cut through her shield. Steve's grip slipped. Hugo fell into the lava. He did not use his fire resistance potion. He believed he was standing in water until his health was nearly gone. Why are you not coming down? He called. Then the death message appeared. Hugo tried to swim in lava while escaping the man from the shadow. His items burned around him. The 3 empty pill bottles did not. They floated on the lava and turned towards Steve like white eyes. The man began laughing. The sound shook the bridge. Steve and Tessa ran for the portal while the creature chased them. Now that Hugo had taken 3 pills, it could strike blocks, open fence gates, and tear rails from stone. It stayed real until they reached the overworld. The moment Steve crossed the portal, the man became a flat black image on the purple surface. He pressed both hands against it from the other side. Tessa broke the portal with a bucket of water. The black image remained inside the empty frame. The truth room. Only Steve and Tessa returned to the coast. They placed a second sign beneath Nia's memorial. Hugo, Day 97. There was no armor to bury. Tessa put his favorite bow in the ground and covered it with stone. The pills did not make him calm, she said. They made him blind in a different way. Steve looked at his own flower. 6 petals remained. He had taken 1 pill. Tessa had taken 1 too. If they used no more, the man would stay partly unreal. If they lost all sanity, he could still gain a body. Neither path was safe. They changed the storehouse into a truth room. Every wall held signs with facts they could check. Stone sounds hard. Water pushes T-pibs. Lava burns dropped wood. Real players appear in the list. The sun moves west. Nia and Hugo are dead. The last sign was the hardest to read. It was also the most important. Tessa created a box for each dangerous item. Water went in a blue box. Lava went in a red box. Pills went into the ender chest, which could not be opened without standing on a pressure plate that rang every bell in the room. Steve wrote their real coordinates in 3 books and carried 1 copy at all times. The man changed the rules that same night. Steve heard Tessa call from the truth room. When he entered, 2 versions of her stood beside the signs. Both appeared in the player list under the same name. Both held identical axes, one pointed at the other. That one came through the wall, they said together. Steve took out a snowball. Both Tessas caught one when he threw it. He struck the floor. Instead of stone, it made the sound of breaking glass. The signs changed. Stone sounds like anything he wants. Water burns if he wants it to. The list belongs to him. Nia and Hugo are waiting. Black hands covered Steve's view. Images flashed faster than he could understand. Nia falling. Hugo burning, Tessa holding a knife, Steve himself standing beneath a wide hat. Behind every image was the man's grin. Steve closed his eyes and swung once. His sword hit an axe. "It is me," Tessa shouted. Steve opened his eyes. One Tessa was gone. The real one stood against the wall, her axe raised to block his sword. A shallow cut crossed her armor. "He made me attack you," Steve said. "He nearly made me attack you too." The pressure plate beside the ender chest was down. Its lid stood open. 1 bottle of pills was missing. The missing bottle. Tessa denied taking it. Steve wanted to believe her, but trust had become another object the man could change. They searched every chest, room, and path. The bottle was not in the base. The obsidian box that held the black knife was still sealed, but something scratched the inside whenever Tessa walked near it. "Open your inventory," Steve said. Tessa did. No bottle appeared among her tools and food. "Now yours," she replied. Steve opened his. A bottle sat in the last slot. He had not placed it there. Tessa reached for it. The bottle vanished from Steve's inventory and appeared in hers. They moved apart. It jumped back to Steve. No matter where they dropped it, the medicine returned to one of them. A new line appeared in the item description. "The patient must finish the dose." "We are not patients," Tessa said. The lighthouse bell rang once. On the wall, a grey picture appeared. It showed the 2 players standing in a small room. A third figure towered behind them with the knife raised. Below it, words formed in black letters. The doctor said he is not real. The picture blinked away. Steve moved the bottle into the ender chest and filled every open slot around it with stone. The bottle stayed there, though the scratching inside the obsidian box became louder. They finished crafting the Eyes of Ender. 12 were needed to open a portal. They made 16 in case some broke on the journey. Tessa carried half, Steve carried the rest. Before leaving, Steve placed one last sign in the truth room. If we see the dead, we do not follow. Tessa read it twice. If I forget, stop me. You do the same for me. They left the coast on day 100. The road inland. The first eye flew west. Steve and Tessa followed it across a plain, testing every river and cliff with thrown blocks. They traveled only during daylight and built small stone shelters before sunset. On the first night, nothing appeared. On the second, Steve woke to find Nia sitting beside his bed. She held the map from the ravine. "You are going the wrong way," she said. Steve looked at the player list. Only his and Tessa's names appeared. "I know you are dead." Nia frowned. "You watched a picture of me fall." He put the message in chat. "You never found my body." Steve remembered gathering the items. He remembered the empty ground where her player model had vanished. Yet her words opened a small space for doubt. "What did you see on the ravine?" he asked. "You building a bridge." "What block did I use?" Nia looked down at the map. Stone. Steve had seen the drawing before Tessa picked it up. The squares had been grey, but Nia could not know that unless she was real, or the man had read the memory. "What did you say before you stepped out?" The false Nia did not answer. Hugo had told them. She asked Steve to slow down. Steve himself had never heard the words. That memory did not belong to him. Nia's face split into a white grin. The man from the shadow unfolded from her body and filled the shelter. His hat pressed against the ceiling. He had no knife. The blade was still in the obsidian box far behind them. He covered Steve's eyes with both hands. Steve saw himself building the false bridge. He saw Nia walking behind him. He saw his own arm remove the last block as she stepped onto it. The vision made him responsible for her death. "You left her nowhere to stand," the man whispered. Tessa rang a bell beside the other bed. The sound broke the image. Steve opened his eyes. The shelter was empty. "What did he show you?" she asked. "A lie with pieces of the truth." On the fourth day, Tessa began seeing Hugo. He walked at the edge of the plain in burned armor. Sometimes he pointed west, sometimes he stood in front of the sun, making it impossible for her to follow the true direction. Tessa refused to speak to him, but she watched too often. Her flower lost 3 petals before noon. The next Eye of Ender traveled underground. They dug a staircase and reached a stronghold by evening. The stronghold. The halls were too clean. There were no cobwebs, broken doors, or cracked bricks. Torches already burned along the walls. Signs pointed toward the library, the fountain, and the portal room. It looked less like an old ruin and more like a place waiting for guests. "This is a hallucination," Steve said. He struck a wall. The stone made the correct sound and dropped a real block. "It can be real and still be a trap," Tessa replied. They placed wool markers at every turn. Inside the library, Books floated from the shelves and opened in the air. Each page showed a black and white image from their journey. Nia above the ravine, Hugo in the lava, Steve attacking Tessa in the truth room. Before they reached the main reading hall, Tessa heard a piston move behind a wall. She followed the sound into a narrow side room. Steve entered one step behind her, but the doorway became solid stone between them. Tessa, I am here. Break the wall. Steve raised his pickaxe. A second Tessa called from the passage behind him. Do not break it, I am out here. He turned. The corridor was empty. Both voices began giving him directions. One told him to mine forward. The other warned that silverfish waited inside the blocks. Steve placed his palm against the wall and felt a slow tapping from the other side. Tell me something from before this world, he said. The voice behind the wall answered first. You always put your sword in the first inventory slot. The voice in the corridor said, Nia hated birch doors. Both facts were true. The man had taken them from memory. Steve placed a bell against the wall and rang it. The sound traveled through the stone. Tessa struck the other side 3 times, paused, then struck twice. It was the signal they had chosen at the coast. Steve broke the wall. Tessa stood inside a room covered with paintings. Each showed Hugo burning in the nether. A shadow person held her shoulders while another pressed white pills toward her mouth. Steve cut through both figures. They vanished without dropping items. Did you take anything? He asked. No. Her answer came too fast. Steve checked the floor. An open bottle rested behind a painting. 1 pill was missing. Tessa picked it up before he could count the rest. They were holding me here, she said. I needed the voices to stop. That was your second dose. And I can think again. We keep moving. The dark roots around her dandelion had reached the edge of her hotbar. Steve wanted to turn back, but the stronghold had already changed behind them. The stairs now ended at a wall, and their blue wool pointed toward 3 different halls. The portal was the only path that had not closed. As they left the side room, the false voice followed. I am still trapped, it called in Tessa's voice. You opened the wrong wall. Tessa did not look back. Steve stayed beside her until they reached the library, while the other Tessa scratched at the stone behind them and begged not to be left alone. At the center of the library stood a lectern with a book titled Paradise. Steve did not open it. Tessa did. The page showed the coast base under a clear sky. Nia waited by the cherry tree. Hugo stood at the lighthouse door. Both were smiling normally. Words appeared beneath them. The exit portal does not send you home. IT sends you to the home you deserve. Tessa turned the page. The next picture showed Steve alone in the end. Behind him, the man from the shadow held a knife to his neck. Close it, Steve said. Tessa kept reading. It says only one of us can leave. That is what he wants you to believe. How do you know? The question sounded simple, but Steve had no proof. Every clue could have been written by the creature. Every plan could lead exactly where it wanted them. Steve closed the book and broke the lectern. The pages flew out as black birds and disappeared into the ceiling. A laugh echoed through the library. The shelves changed into rows of tall figures. White eyes opened between the books. Smaller shadow people crawled from the reading rooms. They wore pieces of Nia's and Hugo's skins like loose masks. Steve and Tessa ran. The clean halls became damaged as soon as they left the library. Doors moved, stairways ended at solid walls. Silverfish poured from blocks that had looked safe. Tessa's wool markers changed from blue to black, then led in circles. The man appeared at every crossing. He did not attack. He pointed with one empty hand, offering directions. They chose the opposite turn each time. At last they heard lava behind a real iron door. Steve broke the blocks beside it and found the portal room. The frame held 10 eyes. 2 slots were empty. "That is too easy," Tessa said. Steve threw an egg through the center. It struck the floor. The portal had not opened. They placed 2 eyes. Black space filled the frame with a sound like glass folding inward. The man from the shadow appeared on the far side of the room. He held the missing bottle of pills. Tessa checked her flower. Only 1 petal remained. "Do not take it," Steve said. The man pulled the stopper and poured the pills into his palm. Then he changed into Hugo. "You can see me clearly if you take them," Hugo said. "No fire, no lies." Tessa gripped Steve's arm. "I know he is dead." "Then jump." They entered the end portal together. Paradise. Steve landed on an obsidian platform beneath the end island. Tessa stood beside him. Above them, the dragon roared. For several seconds, the end looked normal. Pale stone formed the island. Obsidian towers rose around the center. Endermen moved in groups, and crystals burned inside iron cages. Then a square sun rose behind the towers. There was no sun in the end. Grass spread across the pale ground. Their coast base appeared around them block by block. The lighthouse grew from one tower. The cherry tree rose beside the exit fountain. Nia and Hugo waited beneath it. "We made it," Tessa said. "No," Steve replied. "Do not trust the sky." The dragon passed through the false lighthouse. Its wing broke the image into grey pieces, revealing the end island beneath. Steve placed a carved pumpkin over his head so he could avoid looking at Enderman. Tessa did the same. They began destroying the crystals. Before every shot, Steve checked the tower with his spyglass, then watched the arrow's path. Some crystals were false. Some towers were hidden. When a shot struck nothing, they changed position and tried again. The man from the shadow followed between the towers. Tessa saw him as Hugo. Steve saw the black coat and hat. Each time the dragon's breath forced them to move, the figure pointed toward an unsafe path. They destroyed 6 crystals before Tessa's last petal turned black. The man laughed. Black and white pictures covered Steve's screen. He could see only brief pieces of the fight. The dragon diving, Tessa running, black hands reaching. He fired arrows by sound and heard one crystal explode. When the images cleared, Tessa was gone. "I am at the base," she called through voice chat. The portal worked. Steve found her near the edge of the island. She stood inside an empty patch of end stone with the missing pill bottle in her hand. To her, the coast base surrounded that spot. "You are still in the end," Steve said. "I can see my house. Look at your coordinates. They say home." Hugo and Nia appeared beside her. Steve saw them as shadow people with white masks. They led Tessa toward a red bed placed on the ground. "There are no beds at the base yard," Steve said. "I am tired. Beds explode here." Tessa removed one pill from the bottle. "You have already taken one," Steve warned. "I took another in the stronghold." The voices stopped until we jumped. That meant the next pill would be her third before the flower returned. Steve ran toward her. The dragon swept between them and knocked him back. Tessa swallowed the pill. The false base became solid around her. Steve saw oak walls rise for only a second, then fade. Tessa saw a normal bedroom. She opened the red bed and lay down. "Wait for morning," the false Nia told her. Tessa used the bed. The explosion tore a crater into the end island. Steve's shield caught the edge of the blast. Tessa was at its center. Her armor and remaining health could not protect her. A death message appeared through the smoke. Tessa was killed by intentional game design while dreaming of home. Her items scattered across the crater. The pill bottle landed without breaking. Behind it, the man from the shadow rose in a fully solid body. The last player. The man lifted Tessa's axe from the ground. His knife grew from its edge until the tool became a long white blade. He no longer needed dark spaces. Tessa's third dose had made him reel across the end. Steve was alone with him and the dragon. The creature attacked before Steve could gather Tessa's things. Its first strike cut through the remaining half of his shield. Its second removed 3 hearts through enchanted armor. Steve threw an ender pearl and escaped to the base of a tower. The man appeared there first. Hallucinations filled every direction. Some showed safe ground where the void began. Others hid Endermen behind images of stone. The dragon became 3 dragons, then none. Steve stopped trusting his eyes and relied on the facts he still held. The ground under his boots had weight. His block count changed when he placed something. Damage left real marks on his armor. The man was now solid enough to be struck. Steve placed water and let the current push him away from the knife. He fired at the last visible crystal. The arrow struck, an explosion rolled across the island, and the dragon stopped healing. The man came through the water without slowing. Steve climbed a tower with blocks, forcing the creature to follow. At the top, he waited until the dragon dived. He jumped and used a water bucket before landing. The man remained on the tower. The dragon struck him. The black body flew through the air and hit the ground beside the center fountain. The grin broke for a moment, but the man stood again. Steve fought the dragon while avoiding the creature. He fired when the dragon flew and used his sword when it rested above the fountain. Each attack drained the last strength from his armor. The man stayed close, cutting blocks from beneath Steve and showing false holes where solid ground remained. When the dragon's health was nearly gone, the sky changed. Morning appeared over the coast base. Nia, Hugo, and Tessa stood on the lighthouse balcony. They called Steve home. The image was almost perfect. Then Steve noticed Tessa holding her axe in her left hand. She had always used her right. The man could rebuild memories, but he did not understand every small habit inside them. Steve turned away from the false home and struck the dragon one final time. The dragon rose filled with white light and broke apart above the island. Experience fell around the fountain. The exit portal opened. The false coast vanished. The man from the shadows stood between Steve and the portal. His coat moved though there was no wind. The white grin stretched beyond the sides of his face. He pointed his knife toward the void. "Paradise," he said. Beyond the island, Steve saw a wide stone bridge leading through the dark. Nia waited on it. Hugo and Tessa stood farther away. All three held out their hands. It was the same lie that had killed Nia, only larger. Steve looked down at Tessa's dropped items. One red bed had survived the first explosion. He picked it up. The man charged. Steve placed the bed beside the fountain and waited. The knife came down. Steve stepped aside and used the bed. The second explosion threw both of them in opposite directions. Steve landed against the bedrock fountain with half a heart. The man flew over the edge of the island. For 1 second, he hung above the void. His coat opened like black wings. Smaller shadow people reached from below and tried to hold him up. Then the dragon egg dropped from the fountain and struck his hand. The grip broke. The man fell. His white eyes vanished first. The grin remained far below, shrinking until it looked like a thin moon. At last the void covered it. The false bridge disappeared with him. Steve was still alive. The exit. 2 portals appeared in the fountain. One was the true exit, the other was another hallucination. They looked and sounded the same. Black space moved inside both, and white particles rose from each. Steve had no pills left in his own inventory. His dandelion was black. The creature could still be falling, or the fall itself could have been a vision. He tested the portal frames with his pickaxe. The first frame looked like bedrock, but broke as end stone. The black opening above it vanished. The second frame did not take damage. Steve stepped into it. He woke at the world's spawn beneath a clear morning sky. No dandelion appeared near his health. No hands covered his view. The player list held only his name. He returned to the coast on foot because he no longer trusted portals. The journey took 4 days. Each night he slept in the open where he could see every side of the bed. No man came. Steve tested more than the road. He dropped bread before eating it, watched water move before drinking, and counted every block twice before crossing a gap. Once he saw the lighthouse beyond a hill, even though the coast was still 2 days away. He threw a snowball at it. The tower folded into the shape of the man and blew apart like smoke. That vision took no petal because the flower was gone. It made no sound and left no mark. Steve treated it like a warning from a storm that had already passed. He changed direction, checked the compass against the setting sun, and continued. When he finally heard real waves, he waited until he felt the water push a dropped stick, before believing he had reached the sea. The base was quiet when he arrived. Nia's and Hugo's signs still stood beneath the cherry tree. Steve added a third for Tessa. He placed her axe below it and surrounded all 3 with yellow flowers. Then he entered the truth room. Most of the signs had returned to normal. The blue and red boxes held water and lava. Stone sounded like stone. The obsidian box in the corner remained sealed. Steve broke it open. The black knife was gone. In its place lay a final sign. Steve survived. He carried the sign outside and placed it beside the 3 memorials. The square sun was high above the sea. His boots rested on solid grass. Waves struck the real stone below the cliff. For several minutes, nothing changed. Then the letters on the sign moved. Steve thinks he survived. A low laugh came from the shadow beneath the cherry tree. Steve did not turn toward it. He tested the ground with a block, checked the sun, and walked back to the lighthouse one careful step at a time. Behind him, the tall shadow followed without making a sound.